At the heart of all organizational performance is the ability for individuals to work effectively together. Simply putting able people together in a team does not ensure a high-performing culture. So what does it take to develop a high-performing team? Step forward, David Cooper, Impact Senior Consultant and someone who has devoted a large part of his career to developing our proposition on team development. I'm delighted to have this excuse to chat with him from across the pond today. Welcome to In Good Company, DC. How are you today?
Well, thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
It's nice to have you on board. So thank you for joining us. I'm going to get us started with the same question that we ask all of our guests on this podcast, which is to tell us about yourself in 60 seconds.
Oof, you did such a great job of introing me just a moment ago. Been with Impact for going on 20 years now. Sit in our Americas group and spend most of my time traveling the globe, working with teams and leaders, developing teams and leaders. And when I'm not focused with clients, try to focus my attention on what we're doing internally to fill gaps and needs from a model perspective, IP, frameworks, propositions that allow us to do better work. Live in Annapolis, Maryland, with Charlie, who you may hear today, our blind rescue puppy. My wife, Jennifer, son Noah lives about 45 minutes away. When I'm not working, I'm climbing as much as possible and volunteering in the local theater community here with my wife.
Oh, nice. And you said that you started Impact 20 years ago. So you must have only been a teenager when you started, right?
Yeah. Maybe 12 years old. I wish.
What was it that got you into this line of work?
Outdoor education. When I was in high school, I was really fortunate to be able to have an elective physical education course for a couple of semesters in my senior year of high school that was all about outdoor education and was introduced to it. I was a climber at the time and hiker and, Boy Scout. And I just really fell into it. Up the road from my house was an organization that did outdoor education, team building, leadership development from an experiential standpoint. So I was able to kind of weasel my way into working with them and doing little internships and kind of just, started it, became a constant in my career, if you will. And kind of came back to it after university.
Yeah, nice. Well, I'm sure we'll be talking a bit more about experiential a bit later on. But I wanted to delve a bit more into the topic of today's episode, which is about team development. Yeah. And there's a lot of preconception about what that actually is, and team building is what you've kind of already touched upon. But I suppose in a wider context, it'd be good to delve into what is a team? What does it mean to be a team? So first of all, what does a high performing team look like? Can you kind of give us a bit of an analogy?
Yeah, I suppose if a team is a group of individuals working to achieve goals and performance is kind of the execution of action towards achieving those goals, then a high performing team is a group of individuals that are doing that in a way that is incredibly efficient, effective, sustainable. They are focused on improvement and excellence at all times. And I find the analogy or the example question tough sometimes, because I do think that many of our high performing teams are ones that are existing on a daily basis that only a few of us potentially know about. I think when we start to think about examples, be it a sports team, or if you do a quick Google search, you're likely to see Apollo 11 pop up. It's one of these shining examples of must have been a high performing team to be able to put men on the moon. And yet we're not in the locker room. We're not at NASA. We're not behind the scenes of those teams, really understanding, are they a high performing team in the way we or I or Impact would define it, or our industry would define it, versus them being a high production team, if that makes sense, or a team that was really good in this moment at achieving that goal. Are they good in the next moment? And I think that's some of the real insights that we've gathered in working with teams and developing our team performance model and really looking at what is a sustainable, high-performing team that can consistently and successfully reach and exceed its goals, that starts to really create a conversation related to sustainability, related to, in my language at least, high production versus high performance, which I find interesting.
Well, I wanted to kind of delve a bit deeper then with talking about performance, and I guess there are, well, as far as I understand it, there are a lot of models used in learning and development to talk about teams.
Sure.
But you've kind of been instrumental in the development of Impact's team performance model. Can you tell us a bit more about our team performance model?
Sure. Yeah, I think going back 15, 20 years, we're working with teams. We are pulling into that work all of the different models, the different research, the academic insights related to teams, which are all fantastic. And you cannot look at our model and not see them. We are truly standing on the shoulders of giants when we present our model. What we discovered, though, was there wasn't a single model or framework or common language, if you will, that allowed us to bring a team together and provide them access to a more easily articulated and understood pathway to success, to really answering the question, what does a team need in order to be successful? And so we found ourselves leveraging the different models and tools and frameworks out there, looking at the stages of group development and leveraging Tuckman, looking at, the differences between working groups, real teams, and super high potential and performance, leveraging Katzenbach and Smith, leveraging Lencioni and dysfunctions, leveraging, insert all the different team research here. And we wanted to present something that really answered that question. What does a team need in order to be successful? Can we come up with the recipe and the distinguishing factors within that recipe and present a common language to teams, to leaders, so that we could streamline that process and make it more accessible? And that's really the birth of our team performance model, which outlines 6 domains of team performance that, when we really isolate those, understand what they mean, what their value is, and understand that the uniqueness of every team is the individuals that make up that team, then we start to find pathways to really understanding that individual team, those unique individuals, and what they can be doing to improve their performance.
So you mentioned that our model's made up of 6 domains. Could you detail what those are?
Sure. Yeah. So if you were to see an image or a picture of the model, you'll notice that it's a circle that has the domains kind of inside the circle. This image, that's quite intentional from our perspective, because while these domains have interdependencies and interplays with one another, the more and more we dig into this model, the more and more we play with it, research it, and apply it with teams, the more and more these domains stand quite independent from one another. And so at the center of the model, though, you have the unified purpose, which is potentially one of the most engaging, interesting domains that we've really discovered and found insights on throughout our research and development of the model. It simply has to do with the question, why does this team exist? And yet it is the cause of more behavioral gaps and discrepancies in teams than maybe any of the other domains oftentimes, because until we understand collectively why we exist, very specifically for our team, and what our specific goals and tasks are, and we collectively commit to those, we end up behaving in all sorts of different ways based on our own interpretations of why we exist. Linked into that existence is our understanding, and this is the outside of the model, our understanding of all of the different stakeholders that we service, all of the different stakeholders that are invested in our performance, invested in our in our success. And so external alignment is another domain that really asks us to be actively engaged with all of those different stakeholders that are out there invested in us, and that we're invested in as we operate as a team. And then we get into domains that ask questions about our operating norms, our codes of conduct, the way in which we get things done. That's a domain called agreed approach. Then we're really interested in our relationships. We're interested in the emotional trust and the psychological safety that exists on the team. And that domain's effective relationships. And then we're really interested in how are we leveraging diversity on the team? Are we having interactions and conversations that allow us to understand our strengths, understand the diversity that exists on the team, and can we deploy ourselves appropriately in service of our objectives and our goals by leveraging that diversity, that talent, those strengths in the most effective way possible? And that's a domain called quality conversations. And the final domain is high performance mindset. And this has everything to do with our continuous improvement, our learning, our feedback culture, the way in which we invest in each other's success, our individual success, our collective success. And are we always learning? And do we have a way in which we're really leveraging that learning, leveraging the feedback, and improving at all times?
And so I guess the reason that it's in a circle is that, every aspect needs to kind of be addressed in some way in order to ensure, I guess, high performance. Is that right?
Yeah, super fair. One of the interesting things that we've discovered over the years is we've made various assumptions on correlations between those domains. Is there a step process in developing a team that's important because of those domains? Does one trump another, come before another? And what we've discovered is they just don't. And so we've represented it in that way because they are unique to one another, even though they have interdependencies. They can stand alone, and no one tends to be more important than another. And the reason for that is really down to this fact that every single team that you'll ever be a part of or that you'll ever see is always going to be different from each other team because of those unique sets of individuals. And, it's an 8-person team over here and an 8-person team over there. It's 8 very different people. And so the way in which they come together to form that team and achieve those goals, achieve those tasks and perform is just always going to be different. And so it begins with us really understanding those individuals and their relationship to those domains. And therefore, none of them, really tend to override another. And so that lack of correlation has been really, really interesting as we've done more and more research into the model, and gotten more and more data back through a diagnostic that we have that maps into the model called the Team Performance Inventory. And that's where all the team members kind of anonymously, confidentially provide feedback and insight into their experience of the team. And that produces data in a report that allows us to see that collective understanding and unpick, and unpack everything that's going on for individuals.
And I suppose with that then, does that then mean that, because I would imagine that this works with global organizations, because teams are spread across the world now more so than ever, I would imagine. So what trends have you seen either locally or globally? Like, have you seen any differences or challenges with either the model or the way it interacts with teams that are globally based?
Yeah, it's a good question. No, nothing significant. You're always going to have the cultural differences. You're always going to have the nuances of locally, regionally, culturally, globally, our relationship with some of the aspects that the domains bring up in terms of our interactions together. However, they remain universal. And back to those individual, unique individuals on the team and that component that allows us to have the right conversations to explore that. And so, for example, if in a particular culture we have, a specific relationship with emotional trust or psychological safety, which is trending, which we're shining more of a spotlight on these days in terms of understanding its importance from a team dynamic or just from a social connection dynamic. If you look at the world, in different cultures, we're going to have a very different relationship with that idea of emotional trust, the idea of psychological safety, the idea of, wait, you want me to share these personal things about me, or you want me to create a safe space? And so how we deal with that need and understanding becomes our answer to that domain, if you will, versus having to say, well, this is the concrete need that we see universally, and this is what you must be doing, because those cultural aspects are just carry an awful lot of weight with regards to how a team is going to perform. And those cultural differences and exploring those cultural differences are some of the greatest insights we've really used to inform the model over the years. I had some really interesting assumptions about correlations between some domains 10, 15 years ago, and began to do some work with a number of very diverse teams in an organization across regions, and was able to find all sorts of insights, because when I was working with a Swiss German team over here that wanted almost stereotypically nothing to do with effective relationships, understanding what that domain meant and how it could improve their performance was one of the greatest things that they were able to accomplish, because it turned their attention in different ways, when culturally they were like, well, we don't need that because we're meeting our goals, we're performing really well. What if we want to exceed those goals? Oh, that might be an opportunity.
It's really cool to kind of hear where this tool's been used, but also then to hear the direct results that have come as a result, that have come of using it. So that's and where does experiential learning? We've talked about experiential learning right at the beginning, and kind of touched on it throughout. But where does experiential learning and what's the importance of experiential learning in why is it so kind of perfectly suited to help with this team development?
Yeah, I think it's, again, back to this notion of each team is going to be so different. Each team is dependent on the individuals that make up that team and their experience of the team and their interactions and relationship together as a team. You can't disconnect experience and experiential learning from that equation. Meaning the application of their learning, the extraction of their experience and their interactions and their day-to-day tasking, if you will, is just incredibly important to their being able to understand where they're doing well, where they have opportunities to engage in. And so it's not a model where we can present it to the world and say, check these boxes and you will be fine. It is a model that requires us to say, these are the building blocks to high performing teams. And now let's get very experiential, application focused, process focused, observation focused with you and your team, and start to have those experiences, reflect on those experiences, create some actions related to our reflections on those experiences, because they're going to give us the data back into the system that shows us that we are moving the needle in a particular domain or in a particular area. And so you can't divorce the two, because we just have to be in there having those experiences in order to tell ourselves if we're making progress.
Well, and that's it. I think it's not, like you said before, it's not a one-stop fix. It's something you kind of have to keep coming back to regularly. So I guess that's the point of having the model, I guess, and to have that to refer to every whenever you need it.
And common language becomes important there. I think that's what we're really looking to do, and what we're really trying to offer to the world and to teams is a common language. When I talk about this diagnostic that we have, I really only want to do that with a team maybe 2-3 times max, because ultimately I want that team to bake into their DNA an understanding and an appreciation of the value of these 6 domains, so that in a year's time, 2 years' time, 3 years' time, they're okay, because what they're doing collectively as a team is operating from that common language standpoint and scanning at all times for opportunities, so that when we're not there anymore, they're saying to themselves, hey, have we missed an opportunity to increase our agreed approach? Do we have something new that's happened? And then they're having that conversation. Hey, we have a new team member. How are we going to bring them into this culture? How are we going to share this model with them so that they're also scanning for and helping us collectively really track and give due diligence and service to these domains?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and to have that kind of complete common mindset within a team is only going to be beneficial, right? So, yeah. With that in mind, then I want to set you a little bit of a challenge, which is to give one top tip. So, imagine that there's people listening or watching today that are in a place where they just want, right, I want a really quick fix to improve team dynamic, team performance. What would be your one top tip for what they can implement immediately?
Can I give two?
Sure, go for it.
I think my mind goes to two, only because I think there's one that might be new or insightful that is a top tip, and there's one that may or may not be useful cliche. And what I mean by that is this idea of getting to know one another, this idea of team building and the way in which we interpret team building. I put it in quotes or inverted commas there because, we have a very interesting relationship throughout the world with when we say team building, and going to the bar to have drinks, or going to do some escape room together, or going to do, something that we deem high level as getting to know one another, building relationships on the team. And I think that idea of, in our language, effective relationships, and finding the opportunities and ways to disclose, to share information that allows us to understand ourselves as team members more intimately is super important. And I think the top tip there is be really intentional about how you are building that team, because we can do just as much damage with relationships under that team building headline as we can do good. For example, if I'm a team leader and I say, oh, great, this guy David just said on this podcast to go build your team. And so, hey, we're going to go axe throwing, or to an escape room, or we're going to go bowling, or we're going to do any activity X. And I just force that on the team. And I have any team members that have some anxiety, past experience, past trauma related to one of those activities, then we've just done a disservice to that team. And so how do we collectively come together as a group of individuals and say, what's going to be the best way for us to build relationships? And having that conversation would be a relationship top tip. Be super intentional and collective and inclusive with the way in which you are building relationships on the team, and sharing information about yourselves, sharing your humanity, and really disclosing information about yourselves. Because the more I know about you, the less I'm going to label your behavior incorrectly when I see you showing up on the team. And I think the other one that came to mind for me, though, is one that's a bit maybe more insightful for teams out there. And it's back to that idea of knowing our existence and our unified purpose. So many teams that I have worked with have behavioral gaps in terms of their performance and reaching their goals that have a root cause behind not collectively understanding and articulating the reason for their existence. And sometimes the subtlest of differences between why we think we exist, what we think we exist to do, get in the way. And so having a conversation with the team that allows you to collectively articulate and then commit to the language you use for your existence. As a team, we exist to fill in the blank. We service this existence by, and maybe you have a bulleted list there, that everyone collectively has contributed to, believes in, and commits to, is a game changer. And I don't think we we recognize that enough on our teams. And so that'd be a bonus top tip to your question.
Yeah, and I really like that one, because I think it not only is it discovering purpose of an organization is super important, but purpose of a team within that organization is almost equally as important, I would think. So yeah, really getting alignment on that, aligning on that understanding of what that team's purpose is going to be the sort of the start and the stepping stone to to build performance in that team, I guess.
When you've identified one of the not mistakes, one of the challenges that we face when we're doing that exercise, is we think about the organization's purpose, and then we almost, articulate our reason for existence, our unified purpose as the organization's. That's only a fraction of it, because every team in the organization exists to do a very specific thing in service ultimately of that organizational purpose, of that organizational mission. However, if we think too broadly like that, then we miss all those very specific things we need to be doing as our team. If you and I sit on the podcast production team of Impact, we're sitting on that team in service of our mission and purpose to liberate human potential around the planet in as many people as we can. However, that's too broad to really understand how we're going to perform to meet our goals of, getting the best podcast quality that we can get from a diverse set of individuals and leaders and, thought leaders in organizations to come help us do that, or whatever it might be, as we articulate that. So that specificity becomes super important.
The other thing I took from what you said was, don't go to escape rooms or axe-throwing, which is a shame, because I've done both of those things and enjoyed them immensely.
They can be terribly enjoyable. I think my tip there is be very intentional about it. So if someone's gotten locked in an escape room, 3 years ago and never wants to go to an escape room again, that's a legitimate concern that is going to be in that person's mind while we're trying to build our teams.
Yeah, you've got a bit, I would imagine, building psychological safety in order to find out, what to get people to share things about themselves whilst wielding an axe is probably going to be quite the challenge. My next question is a bit more about yourself and your kind of learning experiences, which is, what has been your most powerful learning experience in your career?
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's a big one.
I don't know if I have a most powerful. Well, that's probably not true. I've had some pretty powerful ones. I've had some pretty powerful learning experiences that are, and maybe the power behind them is this. When I've had the most powerful learning experiences, they were in conjunction with challenges I was facing, probably, either at work or in personal life. I'm a fan of saying to groups that particular insights into my personality via, psychometrics or understanding or common language that was offered to me about my preferences and my personality literally saved my marriage. And so that was a pretty, unique set of circumstances that brought me tremendous learning personally that I was then able to share, with clients as I work with them. And that's part of understanding self. As Socrates, know thyself, getting, finding that common language and insight into how do I operate, what makes me me, and what makes me me is different than what makes my wife her. And that's good, and therefore makes me different than Dan is Dan and colleague X is colleague X. And so that was maybe 20 plus years ago, that I'm dating myself again. But
when you were a teenager, you mean?
But it's been instances like that where I've been introduced to something that was immediately applicable to challenges I was facing with other individuals or other situations in my life. That just brought tremendous learning. It was kind of right time, right place, I suppose.
I really like what you said there about understanding self and how not only did you apply it to work life, but also to your personal life. I mean, I ended up interviewing a participant on one of our programs when I was fortunate enough to go to Australia some years ago, and he pretty much said exactly that, to the point where he got quite emotional during this interview, where he shared his story about how he wanted to. They went through a team performing program, and he then applied what he'd learned on the program to his home life, and it helped, like, pretty much parallel with what you've just said about, helping out his marriage and his home life and the challenges there as well. So yeah, it's amazing how powerful just those moments of those pivotal moments, as we often like to call them, can have.
Sure.
So if you were looking back, we're at our final question now, which I'm sad to say. If we're looking back and kind of based on what you just said, what would be if you were starting your career again, what would be the best piece of advice you would give yourself?
I have a very interesting relationship with this question.
Oh yeah.
Because I engage others in this question quite often, and therefore engage myself in it. We do a lot of work with clients, with leaders, looking at elements of our leadership, aspects of our daily leadership and our daily selves that we don't dig into as often as I at least think that we should. And so what we do is we look at the interference and the distractions to our daily leadership from the perspective of our mind, kind of how we deal with stress, the kind of mental side of us being human and us being leaders and team members, et cetera. Our body, our sleep habits, our physical habits, our nutritional habits. And then what we label as spirit, what I oftentimes shorthand to values, passions, what drives us. And when we talk about what drives us, we oftentimes do an exercise, which is write a letter to your 18-year-old self and answer the question that you've just asked me. Mm-hmm. And every time I write that letter, I find myself writing a letter that says, hey, 18-year-old self, life's pretty good at the moment. We're pretty content. I don't know that I want to mess with the space-time continuum that would change me as a 51-year-old, person sitting here writing to you and change anything, because I'm content, because things are pretty good. And so if I give you any advice, you might mess that up. And so my advice in that letter is always, hey, just know that we're in a good spot, and, things are going to come along, and do the best you can. But I wouldn't change them, because I think some of the hardest, most challenging times that I run the risk of warning myself about or giving myself advice to, if I did them differently, I'd be a different person. I'd be in a different space. Sure. And so, as hard as certain things may have been, I think that challenge, that struggle was critical to kind of creating the person that I hope to be and strive to be today. So I wouldn't change anything.
Well, that's a really nice way of articulating it, because it's kind of twofold there. It's reflecting on the past, on what you would potentially say to yourself, but also it's reflecting on the present, which is a really nice way of doing it, because we can often get tied up in the here and now, can't we? And that whole thing of the grass is always greener. And so I think what you said there is really nice. So, maybe we can all learn from that. Whereas, rather than just go straight to what would you change, like what's going well. So that's a really nice way of closing that off. And I think you are probably the first person that said to answer that question with nothing. Actually, nothing. I wouldn't say anything to my previous self. I wouldn't have it any other way. Listen, DC, or David Cooper as your Sunday name, thank you very much for joining me today. And that just leaves me to say that if you would like to find anything out more about impact, or anything to do with the team performance model or a team performance inventory, as we've talked about today, then you'll find all of the links that you need in the description, including LinkedIn to connect with myself or David on LinkedIn as well. So it just remains for me to say thank you very much to David Cooper for joining me. And until the next time, take care.